Okay, let's get right to it. So we're going to call this the good old pre-game foundations, the things that you absolutely need to know how to do, at least at a basic level, in order to be able to pull off portraits or faces. And that is going to be starting with form rendering basics. You gotta know the basics. If you can do the basics, I mean, let's just jump into it. So form rendering basics, these are the shapes that we're going to start with. Sphere, cylinder, cube, donut, cone, and a cheese wedge, or whatever you want to call it. Basically, that's just a slice out of the cube there. If you cannot draw in perspective, that's fine for now. This is not a course or a boot camp for perspective, but rather trying to create the illusion of form using light, shadow, core shadow, bounce light, ambient occlusion, all this stuff. We're going to try to keep it as basic as possible so that we can move on to actually using these elements to make portraits, heads, from imagination, from reference, mixing, for concept, illustration. It's all there, but we gotta do the basic forms first. We'll start with the sphere. So for this, I'm gonna imply that there's going to be a light kind of floating here. Now, again, if you can't draw in perspective, that's fine, but just to explain what I mean by the light position in this scenario is if here's a floor and the sphere is kind of floating there, or let's say its footprint is kind of like that, right? So I'm implying that the light is in the top left, but a little bit forward. So it's kind of in front of the sphere. So it's going to be angled this way. Now, when we have that, it's going to be causing certain things. We have a core shadow, midtone, hotspot highlight, and a regular shadow, and there may or may not be bounce light depending on the environment. Now, before I get into that, one thing I need to kind of convey is the sense of three-dimensionality. So for all of these shapes, what I want you to start to imagine is that they all have a wireframe. You can kind of imagine they have polygons. So I'm just going to do a quick scribble on top of this, kind of like a globe. And all the things wrap around me. I know it's sloppy, but that's not the point. We're not doing perspective class right now. These are polygons, right? Now, the ones facing the light, let's turn that back on, are going to receive light. So obviously it will not be in shadow. That's it. That's all you need to know. All right, you're done. You can go do anything. That's pretty much, that's all of it. All right, the polygons facing away from that light will not receive the light, and everything in between is going to have a fall off. So all this stuff, as something is facing away, it's going to go more into shadow. Shadow is just the absence of this light hitting it. So to clarify, if here's a light source, and then you have a piece of paper facing the light source, obviously it will receive light. The more we start to angle that piece of paper, now it's kind of like this, it's going to start facing away from the light. And if it's facing away from the light, like that, it's going to be in shadow. And this is going to be in like half light, right? So that is what you need to know for the most part as we go forward. I'm just going to fill the background in with a kind of medium color. It's about, I don't know, let's go with 50%. It's about 50%. I'm just going to make a new layer, make that our little light source. Going to make a new layer under all that line work. And, you could either follow along or just watch. There will be an assignment to kind of make you do the repetition of all of this so that you really understand form, the illusion of light, the illusion of three-dimensionality, and how to achieve that by using a couple values. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select a value. We're not going to get into color just yet, but we're pretending there's a floating ball right here. And we're going to pick one of these values. I'm going to go around 75%. 100% being pure white, 0% being black, going just about 75. And I'm going to pretend I'm sitting here and spray painting this floating sphere with this new color, or this new value. As we mentioned earlier, there's going to be a fall off of that. So what we're going to do is find the shadow value. Now, if this sphere was floating in space and there was a single light source, that shadow is just going to be black like this. And in fact, just by doing that, really quick airbrush it already looks three-dimensional because of the core shadow, right? So if we zoom out, it kind of has that floating ball or moon effect. And depending on the location of that light, this will change. So this would actually probably be more like this, even have a bit of a rounding of the form going over. Probably went too dark over on that side. But again, depending on how we shade this, we'll know that the light is in a different position. Now, let's just go back to the flat. What I want to do is introduce another mathematical concept of rendering, which you can find in a lot of Scott Robertson's demonstrations in his book on how to draw and how to render and his tutorial videos. So we're going to take that value and look over here. Look at this distance between where we are at 75 and pure black, which is 0. If you go halfway to black, which is here, that's going to give us a value that kind of just works. And it's something that works in regular daylight. And it's a pretty decent contrast ratio to make it look like it's the shadow side. From here, what we can do is now introduce a bounce light. You can just kind of grab something like over here and just softly put an airbrush. By doing this over and over as a practice, you start to understand three-dimensional form, and it becomes embedded in your subconscious as a second nature, kind of like writing. I'm sure at first in the early parts of your school, writing was kind of hard, but it got easier. Now it's just a second nature. If I told you to write a sentence, this too can become part of your second nature. All right, now we're going to have that hotspot reflection. If we look at this again, depending on where the light is, it's pretty much a reflection of that light source. So we zoom out, it looks three-dimensional, has form and volume. Now, it's not a perfect rendering, and this is not really a form rendering course. It's just the basics right now to help us with our portraits. So I'm going to make that core shadow a little darker, kind of cheating that halfway to black ratio. And there we go, a 3D sphere. Now, what would happen if we move that light source elsewhere? Let's say behind the sphere. All right, let's go back to the flat. Let's select that value, figure out where halfway to black is, which you can also do with the color slider, HSB. So if that's 73, let's actually make it more simple. Let's make it 80. Fill that in. And then obviously half of 80 is 40. That gives us our shadow value. But in this case, if the light is here, now I'm implying that the light is further away from us, almost like we're behind a planet and the sun is very far away. This is all going to be in shadow. And just by quickly laying in that airbrush, letting that core shadow get to the edge there, it feels three-dimensional, floating in space, in a 3D space, implying the illusion of form. Practice this. I promise you it will make your portraits so much better, because the more you understand three-dimensional form, the more form you can give to the shapes of the heads of the characters, the noses, the eyes, nose, ears, mouth, everything. Everything has form. Let's bring this light back over this way. And go back to that original lighting setup from the top left. Now again, this mathematical ratio is mostly for what we find as comforting in terms of a light to shadow ratio. This is kind of the same ratio that a sunlight would do, depending on the time of day, of course, because sunlight does change in terms of the intensity depending on the time of day. But the halfway to black is a good starting point. It's not always the case, but it's a good starting point.